Imagine sitting in your job, the one you have now, for 6 weeks straight without leaving. Maybe you're in a factory, much less comfortable than an office, and you had to depend on someone else to bring your meals, to be away from your family, to miss all the events that are out there. And this is before Uber Eats. There were men and some women who did this. And what they did impacts how you work today and the protections that you have, whether you're a member of a union or you are union free. In Flint, Michigan, at the Fisher Body One plant, these workers sat down for 6 weeks beginning December 30th of 1936. The strike lasted until February 11th of 1937, and you see here a picture from the collection of Sloan and Longway, which is in Flint. There's a planetarium, there's a museum. These are some people that invested in the city who thankfully saved some of what took place there for our learning today. Hi, I'm Sherry Cummins, the daughter of a gentleman who worked for General Motors for 42 years as a union employee. I also worked for a grocery union for a brief time. I worked for the union-free company Conway, and I have a Society for Human Resource Management senior certification, which allows me to have some understanding of the union representation within the workplace. Union presence allows employers and employees to work together in a safe, fair, and productive environment. Though traditionally associated with blue-collar workers, union representation is appropriate and necessary for white-collar workers, and that's what we're discussing today. So why should you care about white-collar workers being protected? Well, maybe someday you'll be a white-collar worker, or maybe you are currently a white-collar worker and you're pretty happy right now. But for instance, in my case, I was a white-collar worker. I worked for a company I loved, and they treated their employees so well that they could work union-free in a transportation environment, which is almost unheard of. But they really were good at what they did. They had an excellent culture. But when it came time to release 2,000 employees, well, even though I serviced the board members and was well loved by the executives, I was let go while they kept someone who did not work there as long as I did in her role. Union representation is necessary among white-collar workers. Traditionally, when we think of unions, we think of workers in safety-sensitive positions like automotive factories, linemen, and dock workers. But in recent years, there is a rise in the interest of white-collar workers for union representation. And why not? With that representation, white-collar workers enjoy more work-life balance. We see more and more of that happening today, where we are losing sight of our home lives. The workers in Flint who literally sat down on the job, who did not see their families, who had to depend on others for food, sat there so that not only they could have the benefits of union representation, but so that your work life could improve as well. So what happened, and why should you care? What they did created a ripple effect that you enjoy today. And to protect the future of employees everywhere, we need to be cognizant of this and also protect the white-collar workers. So the blue-collar workers of 1937 who sat down got some laws on the book that are helping you. And don't our white-collar workers need these same laws to represent them? The National Labor Relations Act of 1935 says they can form groups that are representative of them. The Unemployment Insurance Act, which was upheld by the Supreme Court in 1937, says that you are protected in case of a layoff, which also happens to white-collar workers. The Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970 now sees that we have ergonomic chairs in offices and other things that you might think of as traditionally white collar. The Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 is on the books, and the Federal Employees Compensation Act of 1916. And while our hourly employees that are blue collar have enjoyed that for years of ensuring that they get the same pay for the same job, white collar workers have not necessarily seen that to be true. They need the protection of white collar representation. As with generations, so do opinions fluctuate. Years ago, there was a lot of support for labor unions, and then not so much. But according to a Gallup poll, there is a 71% approval of labor unions by people today, and 40% of members say that membership is extremely important to them. What's interesting from this Gallup study is that engagement is higher among non-union workers than ever before. Why do more people approve of unions today than they have recently? Because the disconnect between employees and employers is widening. Because more is being expected of the white collar worker, lines are blurred between work and home life. Work has to get done regardless, so they're working hours over into their home lives. There's a growing imbalance of power between employers and workers. Why? We know that in 2021, around 230 Google employees officially announced they were forming a union with the Communication Workers of America, called the Alphabet Workers Union. Organizers of that union claim it was in response to workplace harassment and unethical business choices, including a bid on a Department of Defense project that made some of them uncomfortable because they would have developed artificial intelligence intended for war. In 2023, 2 years after AWU's official launch, it has more than 1,300 members, a testament to the new interest in being represented even among white-collar workers. Tech companies know all too well what it's like, and so those at Amazon and Apple have seen unionization efforts not only from blue-collar workers like warehouse employees, but white-collar workers because they believe unionization should extend beyond blue-collar jobs. It's easy to see why. The tech sector is notorious for long hours and competitive atmospheres. Tech workers might have a good paycheck, but they tend to lack that work-life balance we were talking about. And when they're at work, they don't necessarily feel like they belong, that someone cares about their back. So the desire for fair wages is now an argument made in all sectors, not just blue-collar. There are still massive pay disparities in white-collar jobs, and awareness of how historical discrimination has given rise to these disparities, coupled with increasing transparency in that discrepancy, and that probably plays a role. So what does it look like to be a white-collar worker without protection? There are pay disparities, harassment, long hours, stagnation in the role, and a feeling of not belonging. But with union representation, we see less of that and more fair wages, enforced boundaries, which makes everyone more comfortable, a work-life balance, career paths, which increase loyalty, and the knowledge that someone cares, which helps productivity. I presented this to you so that you would understand that I believe white-collar workers could use representation, but the goal isn't to choose sides or to be separate, company on one side, union on the other. It's rather to have a unified working environment where everyone feels safe and comfortable, where there are boundaries of proper conditions that protect everyone, including the employer. When there is a disconnect with employees, then we're not getting work done. But with a union representation, we have alignment. Without it, there's disengagement, and with it, there's engagement, which means retention, which means less money going out the door. Without a union, there could be performance issues, but when they're handled properly through a union representation, we have increased productivity. And while sometimes without representation, we have chaos because people just don't know what to do. They have no boundaries. But with those boundaries, they feel safe and comfortable, whether they're the employer or the employee. These feelings and desires for fair wages, enforced boundaries, work-life balance, a career path, and the knowledge that someone cares does not just exist in American white-collar workers, but these benefits are of unions on a universal and global platform. So in reflection, unions protect employers and employees. White-collar representation by unions is on the rise according to Gallup, and the benefits of unions are universal on a global scale. The needs of blue-collar and white-collar workers are unique, but the benefits of a healthy union environment nets the same positive results, not only for employees, but for employers. I invite you to consider the points that I've made with you today and do your own research and homework so that you can make your decision on how you feel about whether white-collar workers need representation. But from my vantage point, white-collar workers need unions for a win-win for employers and employees, a win-win for all.